Deandre Ayton is officially a Portland Trailblazer, which means that, well, he's finally gotten the opportunity that he has been asking for, which has been happening for quite a while. Deandre Ayton has been one of those guys over the past few years that is just perpetually in trade rumors, and this is primarily because he had issue with how Phoenix was using him in their offense. That's primarily anyways, and that kind of stemmed from an issue that he had with their head coach as well. Now, he's obviously gone, but still didn't really feel that great about Phoenix. He also, I believe, felt disrespected by their lack of a max contract extension, which I don't know how much you can really give the Suns shit for that, because Ayton hadn't exactly proved definitively that he was that caliber of player. So the Suns figured, we'll see if someone will give it to him, and we value him enough that we will if we have to, but we need to be sure that we have to before we do that. Players have egos, inflated ones at that, so I'm not going to knock Ayton too much for believing he was worth that money, but I'm also not knocking Phoenix for not believing he was worth that money, because frankly, he probably hasn't been to this point. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second. It makes a massive difference on how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. At the same time, I do agree to some extent with Deandre Ayton's assessment that the Suns haven't exactly set him up to succeed either. I don't mean to imply, because I feel like a lot of people hear that and think that like that means the Suns were actively detrimental. I don't think that they, severely hindered him. However, they also didn't exactly give him the #1 overall pick treatment, and that was pretty much the case from the jump. When you have someone that was getting like David Robinson comparisons out of college, you would expect that they would give that guy the types of offensive touches that David Robinson would get. Not that he would be that out of the gate, but like if you're trying to harbor him to become that type of player, that's what you would do. Now, don't get me wrong, the David Robinson comparisons proved pretty dumb and basically just purely on the aesthetics of his muscles alone, because otherwise they're not even that similar. I mean, they have a lot of stuff in common because they're both centers, and it's probably the least diverse position in terms of play style. However, I definitely don't really see a David Robinson comparison other than the fact that he has big muscles. But that said, Ayton has never been really treated like a #1 pick by this franchise. Never been treated like a guy who had a lot of offensive upside and offensive ability, which Deandre Ayton absolutely does. So I think there's a little bit of blame to go to both sides of this party, but one way or the other, it's a positive that they have separated. Sometimes divorce is good. That sounded like I was like putting a subliminal message to my parents. I hope they don't get divorced. That would be awful. Completely sidetracked. So let's talk about what Deandre can do offensively. So the main point of contention is post-ups. Deandre Ayton has not shown great signs as a post player, but he also hasn't necessarily shown bad ones. He's been a little bit below average in that area, but with not that high of a volume. And you could argue with more volume, he could get more consistency to it. He could come to expect that as a natural ebb and flow of the offense rather than something that he gets very occasionally. It's hard to be consistent when you're not getting the same types of shots every night. And if he is getting like 3 to 4 post-ups a night or whatever the hell it is, I guess that's probably what he was getting already. So maybe like 5 to 6, I don't know. That would definitely probably yield more consistent results. I also want to mention, like, if he gets a switch, like a guard or like a smaller wing, you definitely have to take advantage of that. And that was something that I saw with Phoenix a lot that they did not do. It was something I was calling out a good bit, if I recall, when they went on their finals run, where I was like, man, you guys missed Ayton so many times in this game. Back when it was that Chris Paul, Devin Booker team, it seemed like they were their eye was so much on the perimeter aspect of the game. They just didn't really look for Ayton unless it was just a wide open dump off or something like that. And he's shown signs of being very capable of being an offensive threat. So outside of the post ups, the mid-range shot looks solid, something that they could definitely have utilized more. His big issue comes with his inconsistency finishing, because it really comes down to his lack of interest in contact, which is a great way to differentiate differentiate between him and David Robinson, because that was definitely not the case for him. He kind of, that lyric, muscles for no reason, Eric Bledsoe, or whatever the hell it is. Sometimes Deandre Ayton is exactly that, where it's like, dude, you look like a brick house, and then you're just getting pushed around, and it's a little sad. Not to mention, you really shouldn't be afraid of contact if you are a brick house. So ultimately, that's an area where we're going to need to see more consistency from him. It also comes down to like touch shots, because he does take those touch shots, and there's times where you'd wish he'd just lower his shoulder into somebody and then get a better position rather than just taking the floater immediately, because those are the types of shots that can be far more inconsistent for him. Every time he goes to the bucket, he puts up something that has at least a decent amount of touch on it, and his touch is off that night, well, then it's going to result in a lot of missed shots. And I've definitely seen those games from Deandre where it's like 3-foot floater, 5-foot floater, 5-foot hook shot, and just everything barely missing. It's very, very frustrating. But with Portland, I definitely expect him to be utilized in the offense more, not only just because they clearly have some investment in his future, but also because what other really options are there? Now, there are definitely other options on the floor, to be sure, not ones that are as good as Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, or Devin Booker and Chris Paul, or Mikal Bridges at times. So as a result, I do think Ayton should get his fair share of those post-up isolations. I would hope the actual isolations against other big men be kept to a minimum, because frankly, I think a post-up big man to big man is really not a good play for basically everybody except for Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid and sometimes Anthony Davis. Sometimes. So that's something that should be avoided. But then we get to the pick and roll with Scoot Henderson and Anthony Simons. They're obviously going to bring very different dynamics as ball handlers and shot creators, because Simons is going to be more prone to the pull-up three, whereas Scoot's trying to be going downhill. I definitely think Deandre probably fits better with the pull-up option, just because, if you're trying to roll and the point guard is trying to go downhill, you might end up just running into each other. They could definitely get a couple of mid-range shots off of this for Ayton, and potentially, maybe this is when he finally starts shooting three-pointers, because he's always flirted with that idea, but not ultimately done it. So that is definitely not something that I'm going to expect, but it's something that could potentially happen, I guess. One way or the other, I'm expecting him to be in a lot of screen and roll action between Scoot and Simons. I don't love the fact that Chauncey Billups is the head coach of this team, because I really haven't seen much creative offensively from him whatsoever, nor was he that good of a defensive coach. But I do think Ayton has a skill set that if you cater to it correctly and you get the pieces in the right place, he could be a very, very effective weapon for you offensively. But I do fear a little bit that the offense might be too basic. Deandre just ends up taking these one-on-one possessions a little bit too often, because I don't think Ayton is like this dominant post player that's secretly being held back. I think he is a pretty solid post player that deserves a couple of more touches, but really, rather than the post touches, just needs to be utilized in the offense more. Whether that's just simply looking for him more, using him as a roll man a little bit more, finding him in the mid-range a little bit more, whatever it may be, I just think they just need to do a little bit more of it. And there would be possessions with the Suns, full quarters, where it just seems like they have no interest in giving him the ball. And I'm like, what did you guys draft this guy with a number one pick for? I get that soon early into his development, I believe by his third year, they were literally in the finals. Or is that... Yeah, that's year 3, right? Yeah. So it makes some sense, of course, that they would go for a more limited role for him just for the more sake of winning. So that's another area where it kind of makes sense why Phoenix went the way that it did. But Portland doesn't need to win. They can afford to experiment. They can afford to see what Deandre Ayton can really do as the player that he is now, rather than the young guy who is developing. But even when he was the young guy who was developing, again, as I mentioned, didn't feel like they utilized him enough. But I'm excited to see him in Portland. I have been a believer in Deandre Ayton for a while, even as his stock has dwindled over the years. I think especially this last year, right? Where he just bad. I still believe in him. I still believe he has potential. I still believe, while he would never live up to Luka Doncic, he could still be a good enough player at number one that will look back years later and say, okay, I understand why this guy got taken over Luka. I think he could get to that point in the right environment. But yeah, obviously, there's no reason to believe he could eclipse Luka. That's nuts. So yeah, I'm very excited for it. I'm excited for Portland in general. Very interesting young team. Good? No. No question it's not, but I always like rebuilding teams. I like to see teams, especially that have been on the same path for a very long time, finally transition to something new. And regardless of what you have to say about Portland this offseason, one thing you can't argue with, it's fucking new. But yeah, episode 6 of My Spurs, My NBA is out, so if you have not checked that out already, I would appreciate it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.